Hello, everyone. Welcome to YALSA's webinar, Make It at Your Library. My name is Nicole Gibby Mungia. I'm the Program Officer for Continuing Education for YALSA. I'd like to go over a few features of our webinar software before we get started. We'll be communicating with each other via chat throughout today's webinar. If you have any questions at any point throughout the program, please feel free to submit your questions via the chat box. If you would prefer to not see the chat box during the webinar, you may click on the full screen button, which is located on the upper right-hand side of your screen, and that will eliminate the chat and attendee list boxes. To undo the full screen option, just click on that button again. In the upper left-hand side of your screen, you should see an image of a person with his hand raised. If you click on the down arrow next to the image of that person, you'll see that you have a variety of options, which include raising your hand, laughing, applauding, agreeing and disagreeing, etc. If at any point during the webinar you experience audio issues, please type into the chat box to let me know, and I'll work with you to resolve them. After this presentation, I will send to everyone a copy of the presentation recording as well as a link to the slides. And if you would like to receive a certificate of participation, just send me a quick email following the webinar and I am happy to send that along to you. Our presenters for today's webinar are Amy Kilbrew and Phi Steel. They will introduce themselves during their portions of the webinar. So Amy, take it away.
Thanks, Nicole. Um, as Nicole said, my name is Amy Killebrew, and I'm speaking to you today as a co-founder of Make It at Your Library, which is an online resource for librarians. But in my everyday job, I'm the user experience and emerging technologies librarian at Columbia College in Chicago. Um, just a brief history of Make It at Your Library. Um, this website was created um, because of iLead USA, which is an immersive technology program for librarians that's run through the Illinois State Library. Um, so my team, there were 5 of us on the team. We ended up partnering with Instructables.com to create our site. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar with Instructables, it is a crowdsourced DIY maker website that has over 100,000 projects on it. And we're using a small subset of those, sort of the best of the best. So essentially what we've done is we've created a site for librarians that has DIY and maker projects from Instructables. These projects are hand selected by librarians for appropriateness, and then we index them with library specific criteria. Our site is still very new and growing. We just launched in October of 2013. So right now you'll find about 160 or so projects on the site, but we're still adding more all the time. So it's good to keep coming back and checking to see what's new. So the one really great thing about using these projects from Instructables is that they have really detailed step-by-step instructions. So chances are you'll find, something for everyone there. Even if it's the sort of thing that you're unfamiliar with, like Arduino or that sort of thing, you can essentially learn how to do the projects because of the really great instructions that are there. So here's just a screenshot of the site. You'll see that there's a big search box at the top, and that's great for so if you're looking for projects that use a specific material, that's a great way to do it because this is searching the full text of all the projects that make it at your library. But the real heart of the site is the indexing that we've done, which allows you to search according to criteria that's important for planning, like age appropriateness, cost, time, and some of the more unique but incredibly useful criteria like our tools and space category. Um, and the tools and space category was something we adapted from Travis Good. Early on in the planning of this site, we were lucky enough to meet Travis Good, who he's from Make Magazine, but he's done quite a bit of research on libraries and makerspaces, and he's actually the person who connected us with Instructables.com. So he created a system called Levels of Readiness, and we've adapted it and we call it Tools in Space. Um, and since this is one of the really useful criteria that you can search by, um, I'm going to go through it a little more in depth than the others, which are pretty self-explanatory. So there are essentially 5 levels: activity ready, project group ready, temporary tool ready, clean tool ready, and dirty tool ready. I'm going to go through and describe what each of these means. And I find that this is a fairly useful exercise for librarians to think about, where your library is, what you're currently prepared to do, and then where you might want to see yourself in the future. So the first category is activity ready. And this essentially means that these are one-off activities that can be done in a multi-use space, often using traditional library materials or arts and crafts materials. And these are the sorts of things that you would anticipate are already being done in a lot of libraries. The next category is project group ready, and this would be projects that are appropriate for an ongoing meetup group or that sort of thing. We don't have a lot of these sorts of projects on the site, but there are a handful. The next category is temporary tool ready, and these are projects made with reusable or replenishable materials or using tools that can be packed away, like electronics kits, Arduino, soldering irons, sewing machines, and we see this as an area of great potential for libraries. Um, so even if you maybe aren't doing these sorts of things, it might be something you could consider doing. The next category is clean tool ready, and essentially these are projects that require a dedicated space with tools like 3D printers or laser cutters. They can be a little bit noisy and can't be moved around a whole lot, so they need their own place. And this is often what you think of when you think of like a maker space in a library. And then lastly is dirty tool ready. And this also requires a dedicated space, but utilizes tools like saws and drills, which can be dirty and noisy. There aren't, but just a couple of libraries that are really doing this right now. So, we don't see a whole lot of this, and you're not going to find a ton of these sorts of projects on the site yet either, but we do add them periodically. Okay, so now that I've sort of rambled on about some of the features, I just wanted to mention a couple more things before handing it off to K-Fi. Because we are a new site and we're still growing, there are actually opportunities for you to help us and contribute and provide us with feedback. So if you go to the site and utilize that large red contribute button in the upper right hand corner, there are essentially 3 ways that you could directly contribute to Make It at Your library. The first of those is just telling us about projects at Instructables.com that you think we should be adding to the database. So all that is you've been at Instructables, you found something that was really great, you copy the URL and paste it into a form for us, and we'll add it to the database. Something else you can do is you can sign up for an account on the site, and you can actually help us start by indexing Instructables projects. So, and we can certainly, if that's something you're interested in, request an account and get in touch with us, and we can walk you through the process of how to do that. And then finally, if you are already a maker yourself and you're doing these sorts of projects in your library and you want to see a project that you've created at makeitaturelibrary.com, you can add your project to Instructables and then let us know that you've added it, and we'll index it and put it on Make It at Your Library. So, finally, I just wanted to let you know that even if you aren't feeling ready to contribute to Make It at Your Library, you can certainly connect with us through social media. And of course, if you ever have questions about the site or feedback for us, we'd love to hear it. And you can email us at info@makeitaturelibrary.org. And I just have to give a quick shout out to the other 4 people who helped create this site, Katie Height, Elizabeth Ludeman, Vicki Rakowski, and Allison Parker. So I think that's all I really wanted to go over. But if you have questions, certainly I'd be happy to answer those now, or you can save them for the end of the presentation. And you can submit questions through the chat feature. Okay, I'm not really seeing any questions yet, but some great comments that the site looks good, so that makes me happy. Okay, well, I guess I will go ahead and pass it off then to Phi, and if you have a question that comes up, I can answer it at the end of the presentation. Oh, it looks like there are a couple questions here, so maybe I'll go ahead and answer those. It asks, are the projects from Instructables just copied over or redone? They are just copied over. We're using the Instructables API, and so the full content of the Instructable is copied over to Make It at Your Library. And those contents, the instructions, always include a list of supplies that are needed, and if there are any special tools that are needed as well. And if that content at Instructables is ever updated, those updates will be reflected at Make It at Your Library. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, well, Phi, are you ready?
Hi, sorry about that. So I'm actually at a I'm actually hiding out in the teen center of the Nashville Public Library right now, and someone came in and was like, "What are you doing in here?" So I had to explain what an adult is doing in the teen center in one of the study rooms. But yes, I am ready to give my side of the presentation. Thank you so much, Amy. I have been a really big fan of Make It at Your Library for a while. It's really cool to hear it described in person. Such an amazing resource. And it's also awesome to know that you're able to contribute to Make It at Your Library. And I'm really excited about getting our team in Philly to contribute as well. So thanks again. So awesome. I'm really looking forward to also doing a little bit of reading up on Travis Good's research with libraries. I think that, there isn't much research being done right now with maker activities in libraries. I feel like this is all just such new territory. So kudos to everyone who is a fellow pioneer. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation and continuing the conversation afterwards, because this is why I love webinars, is because you're able to spark this conversation, make connections to other people in other cities, and share. So very exciting. So again, my name is Phi Steel. I'm a teen programming specialist, and I'm from the Free Library of Philadelphia. So I run an initiative called the Maker John Initiative. I think I actually have put up Yeah, it's the Maker John initiative. Some of you might recognize some of this. Actually, I believe this is up on Make It at Your Library, or the similar project is called Squishy Circuits. More to come on this in a little bit. That's me. So I'm from the Free Library of Philadelphia. I've been a team programming specialist since early 2011. My photo, I was one of the featured library staff in a free library ad campaign this year. So really cool and weird to see myself on Pandora ads and on bus station ads. But this is one of them. My parents are really proud. So we have started up the Maker John initiative. It began about last year, and for all of you people who are just starting your Maker programming, this is something that we just started, a little over a year ago, and we've just grown so much. So it's really cool, and it's really cool to be testimony to, it's never too late to get started in the Maker thing. We started, literally from nothing, just kind of on the backs of some people who are kind of excited about stuff, and we just let it grow from there. And we're also very fortunate enough to have like managers and supervisors who let us flourish and pursue our own interests so that we could kind of build up this program. And I'll explain more on that in a little bit. But before I continue, I always forget that not everyone's from Philly and is not familiar with Philly hip hop terms. So basically, and this is like my legit way of describing John. So the term John is a context-dependent substitute noun that gained popularity in the Philly hip hop scene, probably sometime around the 70s, but it's definitely made this resurgence in the past 5 or 6 years. So the word John is used in the place of any noun, so its meaning changes, depending on the speaker's reference, like, let me show you how to operate this John, or hand me that John right there. So we just decided to name our program Maker John to kind of give it more of that, like, we were kind of playing around with some other ideas, like, city of brotherly love, but we're like, no, it'll just be John. So some of you might be familiar with that term. So what I'm going to cover today is basically just the history of how we built up the Maker programming at the Free Library and our Maker John initiative, some best practices, trajectories and tools versus construction kits, and I'll explain a little bit of that later also. I'm going to give you some quick starter projects. Obviously, many you can find on the Make It at Your Library site, and some professional development ideas. And then I'm going to close up with some challenges and things I wish I knew when I was starting all of this stuff about a year ago. But hopefully I'll be able to say a few things that might be helpful for you as you're building up Maker programming at your library. So like I said, the Maker John initiative started, maybe we got a grant from the Maker Ed initiative. And I think we got that in January of last year, but the programming began with this training camp in, I think it was in April. It was a 6-week-long training camp. And before that, we had kind of built up Maker programming on several other grants. So we had a night hotspot grant. So this was setting up basically computer labs in underserved neighborhoods in parts of Philadelphia where broadband is expensive, or people lack home computers. So that was it was basically embedded librarianship. So we were in the community teaching people everything from here's how to use computer to here's how to use Photoshop to here's how you make a flyer for this event that you're hosting. We also built it on an IMLS MacArthur Learning Labs grant that we got to plan and design a teen space in the lobby in our Parkway Central Library. The Maker Ed Initiative grant that I mentioned a second ago. We also got a DML grant last summer to do a connected messages project. And I'll put links to all of this afterwards, but it was in partnership with the University of Pennsylvania. It was a digital/physical interactive mural. And now we have a Library Service and Technology Act grant specifically for Maker programming. So basically this started off with, and I'll pull this all back to, 2 years ago, we had this night hotspot grant. It wasn't specifically for Maker programming, but all of the people who were hired to work on this grant to run these computer labs, One person was in library school. I'll make the confession now and just put it out there on the table. I'm not a librarian. My background is actually in art. So quick backstory, I'm an artist slash illustrator. I was in Argentina for 2 months on unemployment. Um, I had got all this leather down there, came back to Philly, wanted to learn bookbinding, volunteered in the bindery at the library and in collection care, and then needed a job. And then this hotspot grant opened. And I think my boss, Teresa Ramos, deliberately hired people who were creative and very interested in community development. So she'd hired all these people who had backgrounds in radio and dance and myself in illustration. And I think she knew that she wanted creative people who were running this. And I think she was interested in having creative thinkers. So when the time rolled around for Tech Week, she was like, well, what do you want to do? And she really kind of let us go wild with it. I said, I'm really interested in illustration. I'd like to do something with that. And I've been learning a little bit about electronics, so that might be kind of cool to do that kind of stuff. And just getting that opportunity was a really wonderful thing and really, really empowering for all of us. And I think really because we were so enthusiastic about this, that's what really brought the teens in. Enthusiasm is contagious. So, they wanted to do whatever Miss K-Fi was doing or Mr. Khalif was doing. And, it was an opportunity for them to hang out with these people who were also artists and who were passionate about their interests. I'll skip down a bit. So we developed this partnership. We have a few partnerships in the city, and that is what really strengthens us. Doing this stuff on your own, it's really challenging. So having this group of other digital resource specialists, this was at the time, that was our title, having this other group of creative people that you could do this professional development is really helpful. And then finding things in the community that we could participate in, like the Philly Youth Media Collaborative and the Graduate School of Education had an NSF grant for e-textiles. So supporting our own learning with that stuff. So again, we started with this Teen Media Week in 2012, and it was at 5 library locations. They were community bedded, primarily in North Philadelphia. Like I'm imagining that many of you out there are thinking, you have very limited funding, very limited staffing. You're already doing about the work of 5 people, but I'm telling you right now, it is possible for you to do this. Okay, so some best practices. So I would not recommend, if you're not interested in 3D printing, using a 3D printer, don't just say like, oh, for Teen Tech Week, I'm going to teach a 3D printing class. Because, that's just more of your time and investment into something that you might not be as excited about. So select something that you're passionate about, right? Like just like my boss gave us the opportunity to teach things like e-textiles and podcasting and green screen stuff. It was go with something that you already like, and then it's less work for you also. Identify and connect to local groups, both in person. So meetups was a great way for us to meet different groups of people who are doing things. Any local hacker organizations, those are people who can teach you stuff, right? Crafting clubs, university researchers, artist collectives. If there's a maker fair near you, there's so many all over the place. That's also a great way to meet people, as well as online. So we found a ton of Google Plus communities devoted towards, I follow one that's called Making Learning Connected. And there's another one for Python and Arduino. And it's anywhere from knitting, and it's a fantastic resource, as well as social media for other library, museum, maker spaces. I follow Fab Lab DC. The Library's Incubator Project has some great stuff. Obviously, Make It at Your Library. And SparkFun and Adafruit Education both have really fantastic websites that we've taken a lot of lessons from. The other advice I'd like to give in terms of best practices is, although I love Teen Tech Week, and I think it's a really great opportunity to dive deep into this kind of programming, 1 week, I really believe it's not enough. The most important thing that you're doing when you're doing these kinds of activities is you're establishing relationships with youth. And that's ultimately so much more important than me taking 1 week and just teaching this media tool. What's going to really persist is that this teen is going to have this relationship with me, like, oh, Miss K-Fi is really cool, and she is an artist and she does all this cool stuff, and this is the way that she taught me how to do this thing. But really, they just want to be near you and they want to learn things from you. And it's a real opportunity for you to be a mentor to them. And some of the most beautiful learning experiences have been when I'm, let's say, like sewing a project with another student, and then we just end up talking and sharing things about our own experiences and our own lives. So that to me is the most valuable, like much more valuable than teaching someone how to use Arduino, is by being like, okay, so you're really interested in fashion. Well, how about we sew these components onto your shirt so that you could have a shirt that's responsive to light, or that kind of thing. The other thing I think is a good thing to keep in mind when you're developing a long-term maker program is rather than buying construction kits, think of trajectories and tools. So by construction kits, I mean those prepackaged things that you buy that are, I'll give some examples, like, and these are things that we've bought and used, like Little Bits or Light Ups or Goldie Blocks. So they're typically a bit more expensive. They are easier because they'll grab kids' attention. You don't have to learn much. It's pretty self-explanatory. A kid can sit down and, like in the case of Little Bits, like connect things with, because it's all magnetic, and make things light up, make a fan turn, and those are fantastic. So they're great entry points and they're great attention grabbers, but you're going to have less bang for your buck because they're more expensive. And could you use that money to buy other things like a bunch of LEDs or some EL wire or something like that? So this is what I call, or my colleagues and I call, the 3D printer conundrum. So it's kind of like, do I spend $1,500 buying a 3D printer? We were talking to someone from Anythink, and Anythink libraries outside of Denver, and they were saying, like, we call our 3D printer our very expensive conversation starter. And I thought that was fantastic because it's this thing that, and everyone is kind of holding on to this as this object is making my library 21st century and relevant. And it's a good thing to think about, and have a bit of skepticism about. That being said, we're still buying a 3D printer because we want to be part of that conversation, but I wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket about that. So when I say trajectories and tools, I'm really talking about like defining more like pathways and tools in those pathways that are much more open-ended and provide opportunity for creativity and creative input, and for the youth to really put their own imagination and their own thinking onto this object. So one example I have is, so one of our mentors last summer developed this thing called the Makey Makey Magnetic Maze project. So this started basically, we had squishy circuits, which is basically Play-Doh, some alligator clips, which are wires, and some 9-volt batteries and LEDs. And since Play-Doh is wet and salty, it conducts electricity. So that's the basic principle behind it. It's a really great starter project. You don't need to buy the kit. You can just buy some jumbo LEDs and some 9-volt batteries and some wires, and there you go. So he had all this stuff out on this aluminum table that we had, and this one teen he was working with was just playing with the Play-Doh, and he happened to also have a magnet on him. And then he realized that he could control like the way that this alligator clip was moving around on the table by putting a magnet on the other side of the table and moving it around. So we were like, okay, that's cool. And so then they started kind of making these mazes as a way to, because they were like, oh, well, if we have the Play-Doh out in these snake kind of patterns, we can move things around like that. And then another kid was like, well, let's put LEDs on there, and then buzzers, which led to us using the Makey Makey to create checkpoints and scoreboards. And then the kids afterwards were like, well, we should make a website for like the checkpoints and scoreboards. So we used Mozilla WebMaker to kind of document the whole process. But do you see how that was just so much more open? And it was really all of this took place over maybe 2 weeks. And it really got the kids to take ownership over this project, which I believe they wouldn't take as much ownership if they were just kind of given this kit that was already pre-made. And the other fantastic thing is this whole thing cost us maybe under $15 to do that. So that was a really, I feel like that's an example of something that I was really happy about. So what I'm basically saying with all of this is that select projects where the creativity really is going to precede the technology. So coming from my own perspective, before I started playing around with e-textiles and LEDs and things like that, I don't have a computer science background. I have an art background. I don't have an engineering bone in my body, and I was always intimidated by the idea of, um, you know, maker spaces and things like that. Because I was like, well, I'm comfortable with computers, but there was just something that I really lacked the confidence in it. And I think that activities like this, where the creativity comes first, that really takes away a psychological barrier to engaging in this kind of programming. And I'll talk about some other projects we do where we deliberately try to choose projects that are going to be hyper inclusive. And we also allow for kids, like, we don't force them to engage in these activities. And so some of the research behind this that we're really interested in is Mimi Ito at the University of California, Irvine, who's kind of behind the whole connected learning philosophy. But she came up with these differing layers of engagement, levels of engagement. It's called HOMAGO, HOMAGO, and it stands for hanging out, messing around, and geeking out. So you think about it as like a swimmer, if you're in any space at any time. So say that Amy is leading a 3D printer workshop, for example. So say I walk in and I just see what's happening, but I don't really want to participate, but I just want to kind of watch what's going on. That would be hanging out. But say maybe 10 minutes later, I kind of walk over and I ask her, like, well, what's going on? And she shows me a few things, and I've kind of mess around with it. That would be messing around. And geeking out might be, maybe next week I come back and I say, like, I think I want to make a design for this necklace that I want to make. So it's, and that can happen in the span of an hour, but just allowing teens to come in, check things out. Maybe they don't want to participate, maybe their friends are participating, but it just leaves the door really wide open for them to engage, to choose to engage or not engage. Okay, so some quick starter projects, and hopefully you can see some of these things in here. So we started, some water. When we started last summer, we wanted to have this as low barrier to entry as possible, but to have some really low cost, high impact projects for kids to participate in. The guy with the hat, that's Drew. He was one of our maker mentors last summer, and he was really into more. He had a fine arts background, and he was very excited about making. He was inspired by the Global Cardboard Challenge. So this is, if you've seen the Kane's arcade video, it was this boy in East LA whose dad ran a mechanic shop, and he had all of these leftover boxes, and so he started making this arcade out of all of these boxes, basically. So Drew, taking a tip from that, got really inspired. He is very crafty and started making these pinball games and all of these other like Plinko games and foosball. And so he spent about a week developing these games with the kids, like, what are you interested in? What do you like playing? And then after a while, they started adding electronic elements to it, things like LEDs that would light up when you hit the ball a certain way, or sensors and things like that. And other more like arts and crafts things like that Ben Franklin mural. But again, like I said, the kids after a while just really liked Mr. Drew, and they liked what he was doing. And through that relationship, this was a six-week project. Through that relationship, he was able to establish all of these wonderful relationships with the kids. And yes, they learned some things about electronics, but ultimately the thing that was exciting to them was that they got to hang out with this really cool, interesting person. Okay, so some other quick starter projects. Here's actually a photo of one of the Makey magnetic mazes in action. So you can see it's just Play-Doh. That circular plastic component on the right, that's a buzzer, or it's a speaker. And then there's just the 9-volt battery, and all of those wires are alligator clips. So that's as simple as it was. It was on an aluminum table that we had bought from Amazon. It cost about $50. And we just used that for programming all summer. The maker mentor that was at this one library site said, like, I ran all of my programming off of one little aluminum table, and he reached a ton of kids and had a really fantastic time. And we've actually held on to him as a mentor. That's another thing that's really fantastic. Like, once you support your mentors and they feel like they're getting something out of their experience with youth, he has really flourished, and he's now a Haystack Scholar and is going to be presenting at DML. So it's been a wonderful experience to kind of mentor mentors through this process as well. Another quick starter project. This is something else that we also got from MakerEd. So this is called ArtBots. And basically what it is, and Elizabeth, I see your question. I'm going to answer that in a second. Thanks. If anyone else has questions too, feel free to pepper them into the conversation. So just before I answer, so these ArtBots are basically, you can look and you can see basically it's a toothbrush with an LED on it and a bunch of wires. So these are dollar store toothbrush motors. And what you can do is you buy a bunch of these toothbrushes at the dollar store. This girl decided to keep the toothbrush part on because she liked the way it looked, but you could just pop that off and use the motor, which spins, and you tape tape 3 or 4 markers onto the toothbrush motor, and you balance it onto a piece of paper, and then the whole thing spins, making these really beautiful gyroscopes. So that's another really easy, really low cost project. And then you have this really beautiful, these beautiful images. So Elizabeth, so our maker mentors, so they, when we first started, we actually got a small grant from the MakerEd initiative to pay them over the summer. So we had 5 maker mentors. They worked 25 hours a week, and we paid them about $12 an hour. So that was only a 6-week grant funded project. Our LSTA grant that we had that started in September and is going to be going through May, we didn't have any funding for staffing. The only funding we had was for part of my administrative time. So we kind of were trying to be clever about it and say we'll just hire work study students and volunteers to lead the programming. It's worked okay. We want to have programming every day after school. Sometimes that doesn't happen because there are finals, or because one mentor broke up with his girlfriend and he has to go deal with that fallout, or they go on vacation, or they're less reliable than if we were to hire outright. The funding wasn't there. So Elizabeth, you're right, they are basically college age. The maker mentors we had over the summer, they ranged from ages 19 to 33. So basically they're near peer mentors, but as we had one youth say, they didn't realize that one of our mentors was 33. They were like, because he acts so young, and you would never know because he's an artist or whatever. But I really don't think it matters in terms of age. I think that youth like to just be around people they find cool and interesting. Now we've applied for another grant over the summer, and hopefully if we get that will pay for more staffing. We also have a couple of interns from the Graduate School of Education at Penn, but we want to take advantage of the fact that they are in the Graduate School of Education, and we're thinking about ways of evaluating this programming. And that's one real gap I'm seeing in teen library services now, doing the maker programming, is that there's no real way of evaluating what are kids learning, because it's so slippery. And I think that maybe in some ways people are kind of scared of evaluating it because maybe it won't be shown as being effective, and then it's just back to the classroom. So that's it's a bit tricky, but it's something that we're dedicated to figuring out a way of evaluating, even if it's qualitative, that this is effective programming and the kids are learning X, Y, and Z. Cecilia, I'm seeing your question. What is a good amount of startup money for just the basics to get going at least? It really depends, I suppose. We did our project, so we had a DML grant over the summer, and that grant was really good, and it gave us the opportunity to do a project called Connected Messages, and to have a maker celebration and bring about 50 youth presenters down there and pay for tokens to get them and their families back and forth. And that was about $10,000. I would say if you could get anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000, and then you were putting a lot of work in yourself, you could probably do your 6-week summer programming with that. Even if you were just sticking to things like copper tape circuit cards and squishy circuits and let's say like the cardboard challenge and things like that. I think you'd be very comfortable with around 5 to 7. It's just a ballpark figure, but you can really get these projects down where you're paying, you can source things like, LEDs. You go on Amazon and you can get a pack. I think we pay a pack of 88 smaller LEDs. They come with resistors and it's about $8.88. So like that, like things like that. You just have to do a little bit of research, and that's what work study students are really fantastic for, is sourcing the cheapest tools as possible. Let's see. So here are some more intermediate projects, and this is a bit more about on the media side. So we had a few people who were really interested in green screen video stuff. So again, this was the kind of thing where we bought a green screen on Amazon. We had a camera that we were using, and I think we use After Effects for this. But we've also been playing around with using the green screen with iMovie, which obviously comes free when you get a Mac. Let's see if there are any other questions. All right. So I would say like green screen is the green screen is a really fantastic way to engage kids, and because it's so based on performance, and you could the possibilities are really limitless. It's a pretty fantastic tool otherwise, and you can go from photos and teaching photo editing to teaching video editing, and it offers a lot for creative input. So Nicole, let's see, Cecilia, what is a good? All right. I answered that question. Fantastic. So Tor, how do you work with multiple kids? Several simultaneous projects are all on one. So the way that we always are working with multiple kids, we try to have not only the maker mentor there, but to also have like multiple maker mentors there. So we have anywhere from 2 to 3 or 4. I think it's the most we've ever had is 4, and maybe 1 observer at a branch at a time. And that's, when we are like, we have an embarrassment of mentors. We're just like, that's when we're rich in mentors. And that's fantastic because it'll be like a 1-to-2 ratio or 1-to-3 ratio. But generally, because we work with kids of all ages, we want to focus more on teen and middle school students. But if a younger kid comes into, that's not a big deal. It's usually the younger sibling of one of the older teens, or so what we do is we have one project that's a bit more immediate hands-on, like, okay, well, maybe you just want to draw, or maybe you just want to play with the Play-Doh, or maybe you just want to play with the squishy circuits. So we usually have one station that's a bit more self-directed, and then we'll have another station that'll be more intensive, like, okay, we're going to play with Scratch today, or we're going to play with the Makey today. And that's when it involves more of a mentor, like describing how things go. All right, some other intermediate projects, and this is the stuff that I really love this. So this is these are e-textiles, and if you look closely, you can see there's a flower, and towards the right on the flower, there's a lit LED, and you can kind of see some strings going down that it's sewn. So that's conductive thread. So it works exactly like wire, except it's made of thread, which means that it can be sewn into fabrics and it won't be stiff. So this is what basically e-textiles are. So this is not a piece of paper, it's on a piece of Tyvek. Tyvek is the material that's used to wrap houses. You sometimes see runners wearing Tyvek clothing. But what I love about Tyvek is that it's soft, so it's like fabric, but it's also, you can draw on it as well. So we found that this was a really great way of teaching e-textiles. More importantly, when we were starting to teach e-textiles, we had done all of this programming based around e-textiles, but we didn't realize we actually had to teach sewing. So that was, you pilot a project, then you pull back and you reevaluate, then you push it out again. What I loved about this project is that not only did it teach them sewing skills, but it also let the kid personalize it. This is another one of those projects where I described like, the art comes first and the creativity comes first. And here's a more intensive version of e-textile. So this is like a bit more crafting. I would say definitely this project, it's like, so basically this is it flattened out. It's a little bear, and it's an e-textiles project. So basically it turns into like this little stuffed bear, and these three things on the right hand side underneath the bear's face, those are LEDs also, but those are lily pad LEDs. So that's part of another kit. They're a bit more expensive. They're about $1 each as opposed to, 10 cents each. The thing on the far left is a battery holder with a switch. Not necessary, but we wanted to use them. And then the thing in the middle is a microcontroller. So it's a very small computer that allows you to control how the lights flicker and flash. This project, it'll take anywhere between, I'd say about 5 hours, something like that. So a couple of days worth, because you have like all of the crafting that goes around it, then describing the circuits and all of those things. Um, let's see. I wanted to also give some free browser-based software that we use pretty regularly. And this is, so our IT department isn't that fond of us requesting for them to install software like, well, can you install Photoshop, or can you install GIMP or Inkscape or something like that? We found that the fastest, easiest way was to just use the browser-based software. So Pixlr is the browser-based version of an image editing software. So it's similar enough to Photoshop, but you can edit software. Sploder and GameStar Mechanic are really fast ways of doing game design, very simple. Scratch is animation. And so that introduces kids to drag and drop programming. That came out of MIT. It's also very fantastic. And we use that to make video games, and then the kids use the Makey Makey to create their controllers. I think I'm going to wrap this up soon because I want to give a little bit more of time for question. Soundation, beat making. I also wanted to point out some of our favorite iPad apps to use in team programming. And we've just started, we're using these a couple of years ago and kind of stopped, and then now we're starting to bring them back. So Sketchbook Pro, it's drawing, Toontastic, animation, iStop Motion, stop motion. There's this fantastic iPad synth. It's a little expensive. I think it's around $15, but it's really, really fun to use. It's called the Korg IMS-20. Some other music editing software, Fruity Loop Studio, FL Studio, and GarageBand for the iPad is really fun too. I would definitely recommend playing with that. Some other ideas about professional development and documentation. We found it was really awesome to allow other library staff, from the executive staff all the way down to, all the way down to security guards. Everyone wanted to be engaged in this because they would see these kids doing these things. And instead of just having them being there to like monitor students, that's an opportunity for them to connect to the youth in their communities also, So we've been doing a bit of professional development around making, where we've been allowing the staff to come in when no one's there. We'll dedicate a morning just to staff professional development, and they're just encouraged to play around with the equipment just as though they were teens. The other thing I really recommend doing is just documenting everything that you've done and sharing it with other people in your organization, whether it's through social media or blogging, because these are the types of things. This is exactly what we did, which led to our future funding, as well as our institutional buy-in. Siobhan Reardon, who's the director of the library, she's amazing. I really think it was because we had kind of built this up slowly, and we were kind of flying under the radar, and we would pop up with these things every once in a while that really got her attention. And now she's really excited and totally on board with our maker programming. It's also a really great way of connecting to other people and sharing ideas. We try to share as much as possible. And it also establishes a timeline/trail of whatever you're doing, because sometimes you forget, like, did we do that last year? Did we do that this year? Some other challenges, really identifying those low cost, high impact tools. That's why it's great to be able to collaborate with other people to figure out, like, well, what's the best way of teaching this, but I don't want to spend $100 on it. Making meaningful relationships to other libraries and museums, that's been challenging. Social media is fantastic for that, and figuring out the time to do that. Convincing your library staff to dedicate time towards learning this stuff and establishing staff buy-in. I think that professional development is a great way of doing that. But again, it's convincing whoever's in charge of that professional development that this is a good idea. Attracting youth, certainly that's been challenging. We're serving youth in North Philadelphia. It's a really, it's not a very well-served community. We would love to reach more kids, and that's challenging. And also identifying and funding mentors. And I think, we can talk about more allowing for multiple levels of youth engagement, documenting everything, and designing programs alongside youth. I'm seeing Lorraine's questions. Do you use collaborative software for staff to build the timeline to take notes on projects? We use Google Drive, and we have weekly meetings with our maker John, the maker mentor staff. So, and that's about an hour and a half long meeting on Wednesday mornings. But we keep track of everything on Google Docs, and I try to have as much personal contact with the maker staff as possible. I'm planning a squishy circuit, Karen, for the program, but I'm afraid it's too easy. What could I do as an add-on to make it more advanced but doable in about 2 hours? I mean, certainly, try the magnetic maze project or adding some things with the makey. I think the squishy circuits lends itself to the makey really easily. So just if you can get a laptop or access to a computer, and if you so the makey costs about $50, and it's a way for you to turn anything basically into a controller, anything that conducts electricity. So we found that actually a makey is a really great investment. You can do a lot of programming based on that. Nicole, are you interested in closing this up or fielding any more questions?
I think that we have 2 pages of resources for everyone that Amy and K-Fi have contributed. This first slide of resources is provided by Amy. So Amy, I'm not sure if you wanted to go into any detail about that or if you had anything to say about that, and then K-Fi, we can go to the next slide and you can talk about that.
I don't really have anything to add here. They're fairly straightforward, and these were things that were recommended to me by the other Make It at Your Library co-founders. So I'm not familiar with all of them, but they recommended them. The one that's not listed here is the Library as Incubator project, which I think K-Fi mentioned earlier. So.
Yeah, I really like How to Smile. I've used that. One other thing that I didn't put on my resource slide was Fuse Studio, Fuse Studio. I'll write it down in the fusestudio.net. And that's run out of Northwestern, and it's really inquiry based, lots of video, and it reminds me of the How to Smile resource that you mentioned, Amy. That one is a really fantastic resource.
Okay, I'll just switch to the next slide. And these are resources provided by K-Fi.
Yeah, I didn't do the best job with sticking like the actual URLs for Pixlr or Scratch, but these were just some really simple ones that should get you started. And again, feel free, you can always contact anyone from our Maker John team or me, and we love sharing ideas. I think that libraries are too secretive and want to hold on to their ideas and hold on to their potential funding. It's a little, they're doing a disservice by not sharing everything. So we like to share everything, and we're working on building up our website right now, and I'm really looking forward to contributing to Make It at Your Library.
Excellent.
Great. So I think if any of you have additional questions that have come up, please feel free to enter them in the chat box.
I think we're getting glowing feedback, Amy. This is great. We should do this more often.
I wouldn't mind.
I think Cecilia did have a question for any of you participants still on. If anyone else is a school librarian, feel free to type into the pod if you would like to get in touch with each other after the webinar. Just put in a quick message in the chat pod and I can connect you. Hi, Tor. Yes, I will email a link to the recording and the slides to everyone following the program.
Okay, it looks like there was a question about Make It at Your Library, if it's geared towards library staff or anyone. It's geared towards those who are, planning library programs, um, and, looking to incorporate DIY and maker projects into their programming. So it is more for library staff, but certainly anybody is free to go and look at it and search for things there.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about the Make It at Your Library website is that it has it, you can select, like, I have 1 hour to do this program. And I like that you could, I guess, what would that be called? You could kind of refine your search for workshops.
Yeah, that was the intention. Um, what we found when we started the project was there's a lot of information out there about making and DIY and instructions and all of these things, but they weren't really geared specifically towards librarians. So we wanted to make it a little easier for our profession to find things. Um, yeah, it looks like um, Miss Simmons had another comment about database for programming structures alongside actual projects might be interesting, and that is true. That's sort of the next phase of our development, but we're in the very, very, very early stages of that. Working again with Instructables and their parent company Autodesk to try to get some of that um, data for librarians.
Amy, I'm going to go back to your slide. So you'll see that as well.
Great. Well, if anyone else has other questions, you may feel free to contact us or or send your questions to me, and you'll all be receiving an email from me shortly. So feel free to do that. There's always a way that we can continue this conversation offline, and I think it's certainly important that we do so.
Definitely. Thanks, everybody.
Mhm. Agreed.
Okay, Fire Amy, it looks like there's a question from Cecilia about, is there a list somewhere of startup tools to get?
Mm, I don't know of any, just sort of a blanket list of recommended tools. I think it really depends on what you're planning to do. I don't know,
Right,
maybe
and I would
Kate,
check
you have
out
something.
yeah, I would check out the MakerEd initiative. If you just Google MakerEd, they might have a list of things. So they give us a possibility box at the beginning of the summer, and it had everything from 9-volt batteries to coin cell batteries to LEDs to a squishy circuits kit to a makey makey to just uh, copper tape and construction paper and glue. It was like a really beautiful balance of like some, but it was very open ended arts and crafts. Power tools, no. Even we got soldering irons much later on, but I would say there's a lot of safety things, and that's something that we're kind of considering too as we're expanding. Like, what do you want to have? Like, what's safe? What's not? How do you get around? Like, do we have some sort of certification that kids have to do in order to participate or in order to use the tools and parental permission? The possibility box came when we joined MakerEd. And I think this year the MakerEd sites have already all been chosen, but I think you can still, follow them on Facebook, and you can just, if you go to like their website, you can see their contact information and certainly contact them. I think they're also a pretty open organization as well. We didn't pay for the possibility box. It came to us for free as joining when we joined, but we did pay dues this year, and I think the dues covered the cost of the possibility box, and I don't know how much the possibility box cost. And how much are the dues? The dues were on a sliding scale. So again, any questions you have about MakerEd, I would certainly contact them. And it's a really small organization. They're run out of Oakland. They're kind of the education arm of Make Magazine. So certainly contact them with any questions you might have. Cool.
Great. Well, I think we are going to close down the meeting now. But again, let's continue this conversation. If you have additional questions that you would like to submit to Amy or KFI, please feel free to email me. You will be able to obtain my contact information in the email that I'll be sending out to you this afternoon. And that email will include the links to the presentation and the slides. So thank you for all of you who are still on. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, thank you so much, Amy and K5, for a great presentation. I really appreciate it. YALSA really appreciates it, and I know everyone on the webinar did.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
Yes,
Okay,
thank
everyone,
you.
have a great rest of your day, and we are going to close the meeting now. So stay safe, stay warm if you are somewhere cold.
Okay.